mind. Where's my phone?
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
We have all had those mornings, the anxiety, the missed calls, the desperate wish for a delete button for your own memory. At Litho, we don't call it a drug, we call it Control Z, an upgrade for your consciousness. But if you peel back the sleek corporate marketing, you find the world's most terrifying molecule, scopolamine, famously known as devil's breath. Derived from the beautiful but deadly Brugmansia flower or angel's trumpet, scopolamine is a masterpiece of biological hijacking. Unlike most substances, its unique molecular structure allows it to glide through the blood-brain barrier almost instantly. Once inside, it performs what we call competitive inhibition. It floods the muscarinic receptors in your hippocampus, which is essentially the brain's save button. When those receptors are blocked, the brain stops recording. You aren't unconscious, and you aren't asleep. You are simply a biological machine with the record button turned off. This is what leads to the chilling zombie effect. Someone who can be commanded to hand over the bank details or walk miles away from safety, only to wake up the next morning with a total clean slate and no memory of the person who took everything from them. The true irony? The World Health Organization lists this exact molecule as an essential medicine for motion sickness. It's a substance that lives in two worlds, a life-saving patch behind the ear or a tasteless, odorless weapon of absolute control. Today, we are going to show you how a simple flower became the world's most effective tool for erasing the human mind.
Scopolamine, notoriously known as devil breath, is a molecule of profound contradiction. It begins with the Scolonaceous plant family, specifically the angel trumpet tree or deodar plant. While these grow as ornamentals globally, the major hubs for street production are in the Andes of Colombia, while medical production is centered in regulated plantations in Australia and India. Why the seeds? Because this is where the plant concentrates its secondary metabolites, in this case trophophene alkalines, as the primary chemical defense mechanism against herbivores. To isolate this molecule, we start with mechanical lysis, grinding the seeds into a fine mill to increase the surface area for our regions. We are targeting the scopolamine cation. The street way is a crude two-step isolation. First is basification, using ammonium to deprotonate the nitrogen, turning the salt into a neutral free base. Second is solvent extraction. Because the free base is lipophilic, we use gasoline, represented here as octane, as our organic phase. The molecule partitions from the aqueous seed mush into the gasoline layer. Once evaporated, you are left with a crude yellowish solid full of toxic impurities like atropine. The medical way uses pharmaceutical rigor. After basification, we use HPLC, high-performing liquid chromatography, to achieve 99% purity. Finally, we perform salt formation, reacting with the pure feed base with hydrobromic acid. These resalts the nitrogen, creating scopolamine hydrobromine, a stable wild crystalline powder. This purity is what allows us to safely microdose the molecule into a transdermal patch. Whether it enters the bloodstream via inhalation on the street or is precisely microdosed at 1.5 milligrams via a clinical patch, the mechanism is the same. Competitive muscular antigens. Normally, acetylcholine binds to the muscular receptors like the M1 receptors in the hippocampus to encode new memories. Scolopine, however, jams these receptors and physically blocks the binding site, shutting down memory encoding. You are awake, but your save button is off. Clinically, we use this same jamming effect at the control release rate to stabilize the inner ear signals that cause motion sickness. The toxicity depends on the dose. Metabolism involves a CYP3A4 hepatic enzyme in the liver. On the street, because the dose is unpurified and unpredictable, users hit a full antiallergenic toxidrome, profound hallucination, life-threatening tachycardia, and extreme mydriasis. Long-term exposure can lead to chronic cognitive impairment and post-scopolamine syndrome, where the brain struggles to restabilize its acetylcholine levels. Same molecule, two vastly different outcomes. One is critically asset for surgery, the other an illegal weapon of control. The lethal dose for an adult is unpredictable, but for a child, as little as 10 micrograms can be fatal. It all comes down to the chemistry of the dose.
Scopolamine is a naturally occurring tropane alkaloid, and it was used by indigenous populations hundreds of years before it was synthesized in Europe, Asia, and Americas. And these plants were used for shamanic rituals, spiritual ceremonies, and traditional medicine. It was very valued because of its sedative and hallucinogenic effects, though it was not really understood why it caused that at the time. The active tropane alkaloids scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine were isolated in the 19th century as chemistry advanced. Early chemists recognized these compounds for their anticholinergic effects. It blocks signals from acetylcholine, a major neurotransmitter involved in memory, muscle contraction, and autonomic nervous system function. Scopolamine distinguished itself from atropine by having a stronger effect on the central nervous system, making it especially interesting to early pharmacologists and anesthesiologists. By the early to mid-20th century, scopolamine had entered mainstream medicine. It was used as an anesthetic adjunct and for motion sickness, especially during World War II, when aviators and sailors were given transdermal scopolamine to prevent nausea. Its use expanded into surgical settings to reduce starvation and cause sedation. The development of transdermal patches made scopolamine a staple treatment for motion sickness, and it is still used today. Because of its well-defined effects on memory and attention, scopolamine became a very powerful tool in neuroscience research. In experimental settings, controlled doses of scopolamine are used to induce temporary cognitive impairment in human and animal models. This provides insight into memory formation, the cholinergic system, and diseases like Alzheimer's. The scientific use highlights how scopolamine's central nervous system effects are predictable and measurable in controlled environments. Public awareness of scopolamine in mainstream media accelerated in the early 2010s, especially with news reports out of Colombia. In 2010, CNN ran a few stories about scopolamine and how it was used in robberies in Medellin and Bogota in Colombia. Other news outlets hopped on the bandwagon soon after, and these articles tend to focus on shamanic anecdotes and tend to have little scientific evidence of what was actually going on. It doesn't even include toxicology reports, for example. Over the past decade, the devil's breath narrative has become a persistent in internet culture, repeatedly revived by travel blogs and frame reporting. Even as scientific experts emphasize that scopolamine causes confusion, delirium, and memory impairment rather than precise mind control, media outlets continue to highlight dramatic individual cases. Lastly, I know a lot of people have been talking about the files, and I guess scopolamine was likely a plant that Jeffrey Epstein had. Just throwing it out there.
A few moments later.